So, today I want to talk about the Internet Archive being forced to remove more than 500,000 books from its lending program. As the result of 4 years of legal issues with publishers, the Internet Archive has been forced to remove more than 500,000 books from its lending library. Among that list is over 1,300 books that are on banned and challenged book lists that some people may struggle to gain access to otherwise. This removal marks a devastating restriction of access to information, especially in places where it may be difficult to obtain copies of these books or they may be financially prohibitive. The Internet Archive is effectively everyone's public library if you have internet access, and the amount of data they have accumulated from the entirety of the Internet's history to rare and obscure books is purely magnificent. The benefits of having a global archive of this size, where people can go to and gain access to information, should be evident. And yet, we see these publishers come in and restrict that access and use the law as a tool and a weapon to prevent the spread of information. So, why? Why are these publishers doing this? The short answer is copyright and profit motive. However, this is a topic that will delve into far more than just copyright. It will go into topics like changing and evolving mediums, libraries and digital access, and who controls the digital space. The story starts with an initiative that Internet Archive had been working on for years called Controlled Digital Lending. This would allow Internet Archive to take copies of their physical books that they own and possess and digitizing them. These digital copies would then be lent out based on the number of physical copies that existed in Internet Archive's possessions. Now, these structures were put in place to prevent people from redistributing books, so effectively, there was not much different here from how a physical library would function, lending you a single copy of a book, and you return it, and then someone else can take it out. However, this did do two things. First, it changed the medium in which these books existed, which, while it doesn't sound important, will come up later. But far more importantly, it provided access to these books to the entire internet. Now, many of these books are books that were either never going to be released again, or books that were so prohibitively expensive to buy that they were barely available, and if they were available, it was only through resellers. Even if publishers still had access to the legal rights on many of these older books, it was against their financial interest to provide or create digital copies. And so this program functioned archivally to prevent lost books and information and provided access to those books. It's also worth noting that even in the case of books that are still published, older editions can contain different introductions and prefaces, and contain extra content that typically isn't preserved between editions, and thus they're worth archiving or making available. Protecting all of this data and information and making sure that people have access to it provides no real net loss to these publishing companies. And in a lot of ways, the Internet Archive functioned in a way that was no different than one person lending a book to a friend. In short, the Internet Archive functioned as one of its purposes. It functioned as a library. Then in 2020, the pandemic happened, and people lost access to physical sources that provided books, journals, medical and academic resources, and so much more. Libraries, bookstores, and universities were all shut down, and overall, the physical infrastructure that we had in place stopped functioning. And of course, that was for a very good reason, given that staying inside and staying away from other people was the safest way to avoid spreading COVID. In response to this, however, Internet Archive made a bold decision to remove restrictions on their lending programs and set up the National Emergency Library. This library made it so that people could borrow copies of their books regardless of the number of physical copies that Internet Archive owned. While it's beyond the scope of this video, there are countless testimonials that exist from teachers, librarians, and medical personnel outlining the importance of this emergency library during the first few months of this pandemic. Now, it's also worth noting that it allowed people to connect to one another. And again, I can't emphasize its usefulness. There are accounts where people likely had their lives saved because of these books being made available. But despite its usefulness and despite support from many academic institutions, the program had to be shut down 2 weeks prematurely because the Internet Archive actually got sued by 4 major commercial publishers for copyright infringement. So yeah, Hachette Book Groups, HarperCollins, John Wiley and Sons, and Penguin Random House sued a nonprofit archival library instead of working with them during a global pandemic. You can clearly see where their priorities lie, and it's in their own pockets, not in the lives or the needs of their readers. To make matters even worse, these publishers didn't even just take issue with the emergency library, but also took issue with the entire controlled digital lending system. The publishers in this case essentially saw a program of book preservation as a form of mass piracy and of copyright infringement, since Internet Archive was alleged to be publishing copies of books in a new medium without authorization. So, remember when I said we'd come back to the fact that the digital media was being produced in this new medium where physical books were taken and made into a digital format? Yeah, this is when it becomes relevant again. Because instead of it being seen as an archival tool for books that wouldn't even be touched otherwise, it was seen as a form of piracy and copyright infringement. And additionally, Internet Archive was also accused of distributing said copies in a way that affected the profit margins of the publishing companies via their digital licenses program. Which brings us to a key difference that exists between physical and digital media in libraries. Currently, when libraries own a physical copy of a book, they maintain rights over that physical copy. They can buy them, sell them, lend them out to people on loan. They can donate the books. Heck, they could even destroy the books if they wanted to. It's their book and they can do what they want with it. The library pays the flat fee for one copy of the book at standard consumer price, or they receive it via donation from a generous donor, and that book belongs to the library for as long as the library deems fit. However, the agreements surrounding digital media are far less favorable for libraries. Libraries have to pay for licenses for a period of time and can only lend out copies equivalent to the number of copies they have active licenses for. Meaning if you want to have 2 different books available for people, you have to pay for 2 different licenses. They also have to pay substantially more for these licenses than a consumer has to pay for the exact same copy of the book. And they have to keep paying over time to keep the book in stock. Essentially, the library is left renting the book from publishers in order for them to loan it to their users. You can see here as an example, a certain book that costs $18 for a physical copy, where the library has to pay $55 for a digital copy, and that price cannot be haggled with publishers. And for that ebook, it expires after a certain amount of time or a certain amount of checkouts. So it's usually after 1 or 2 years, or say 26 checkouts, whichever comes first. And then the library has to pay for the license to be renewed. And this comes with a significant set of downsides, as it limits the number of books in e-libraries due to the cost of upkeep from these licensing fees. Librarians have to choose which book to keep licenses on instead of being able to buy a book once and having it forever. Now, it's hard to expand a library that's going to consistently cost more with time instead of being able to use each year's budget to purchase newer and newer books and expand the library. And again, this comes with a significant drawback, as libraries then have to choose which titles they are going to put in their libraries. And they're going to choose more popular titles over less popular, but still significantly relevant titles that deserve a space in the library. And all of this doesn't even begin to touch on the artificial scarcity of these systems and limiting book loans on a digital copy that can be infinitely reproduced. What happens here is that it creates artificial wait lists and limits access to knowledge by making it so that you have to wait in order to get access to a book. If you've ever borrowed from a digital library and you see a wait list, that's not because the library wants to prevent you from getting access to it. It's because the publisher is forcing them to do so. Again, they can only rent out as many copies as they have available. And, one could make an argument that if they had to pay more money, say they were paying $55 compared to $18, but they could, loan out as many copies as they wanted, it might be worth it. However, that's not what's happening here. They're still restricted as if they own a physical copy, they just have significantly less rights on it. And the thing is, a physical book is only limited because only one copy of the book exists. But digital books can be copied infinitely many times. And we saw this when the Internet Archive had its National Emergency Library. And again, that's probably part of the problem that publishers had with all that. And that brings me back to the lawsuit. Sparing you all of the years of back and forth and the case and how it went, the fact of the matter is that Internet Archive more or less lost Hachette versus Internet Archive. It was determined that scanning and lending systems like the one that was being used was in fact copyright infringement. However, the current state of things is more of an unhappy medium where Internet Archive had to pay out an undisclosed payment and remove all books in which only digital copies already exist. Which means that they've been allowed to maintain copies of books on their website in which digital copies do not exist, and maintain their accessibility program for all of their books. It's not really a great place to be, but it could be far worse. The net results, however, is that the more publishers saw this and started pouncing on the situation. Publishers under the Association of American Publishers, who were not part of the named list but were very much in favor of the lawsuit, managed to put in requests that totaled in the removal of 500,000 or more books being removed from the Internet Archive. No matter what way you put it, this is a needless restriction on access to information from companies who simply want to extract a licensing fee from libraries, a fee, mind you, that most authors probably won't see. So it's only really the publishing companies that are gaining from this. Now, this whole topic will need to be revisited again on this channel and in the future elsewhere, especially as libraries increasingly come under fire in the United States and major corporations continue to shut down access to archival tools that are used to protect media. This story comes on the heels of another major incident where a major video game archival site called Vim's Lair was targeted by major gaming publishers. And you already have situations where music publishers are targeting the Internet Archive for older pieces of music that would otherwise be lost to time. In this digital age, I think we should be able to have proper archives and libraries of all of humanity's data, even if publishers don't want to do it, or more accurately, don't have the financial incentive to do so under our current economic realities. There's really a large conversation to be had about how libraries are meant to function in this digital space, especially when the law enforces artificial scarcity and allows companies to extract money from organizations that are trying to provide free access to information and provide that all to people who need it. What we really need to question here is the relevance of copyright, especially in the digital age, and especially as having the ability to transform our media between different platforms becomes more and more relevant far more quickly. It's not long ago that we used CDs or DVDs as our primary sources of media for movies, for example. And, we've come to a place where now we almost exclusively have digital licenses. And there's a whole set of problems with that. But the fact is that we're constantly seeing an evolution of how we consume and use media. And so as these formats change, and as we see this change more and more often, should publishing companies be allowed to restrict our ability to transform them from one source to another? Personally, I don't think so. And when it comes to digital media, there are significant advantages that it has over physical media for certain people. Physical media can't provide you with the ability to have text to speech, for example. And it's impossible to carry an entire physical media library in your pocket. But digital media allows for this. we're able to have so much more access to information at our fingertips. And licenses artificially limit our ability to transform our media, to share information, and to carry it with us. In the case of Internet Archive, most YouTubers, myself included, most of the people that you watch or listen to, have used it for research or to dispel misinformation. This is an organization that should be protected for the work that it's done, and it provided a service that no other infrastructure was able to do or provide during the pandemic. The fact is that it's being limited in its capacity to provide access to information, and that should be recognized as infuriating at the very least. And the trouble here is that most of these publishers are being short sighted about the value of this library and libraries like it, as they're able to provide a lot of value to society as a whole and to provide free advertising for their books, which might actually influence their own bottom lines. I wish, truthfully, the Internet Archive all the luck going forward in this appeal process, and I hope they win. And I hope this decision gets reversed, and that these 500,000 plus books are made available for everyone again soon enough. Because this needs to change. But if you've learned something here today, just know you can support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. You can also check out the links in the description down below where you can join the Discord where we have great conversations on topics like these, or you can support my Patreon where you can financially support the work that goes into researching these videos and making them happen. But please only do so if you are in a financial place to do so. And with that said, my name is Anarchist Terra. Thank you so much for watching today.